Hey, I'm Julie Rose, and this is Love What You Love, a podcast about the things people are passionate about. These things that people love are always a unique expression of curiosity and joy and wonder, and we need a hell of a lot more of that these days. So every other week, I'll introduce you to another fascinating human who is into really interesting stuff. I can't wait to introduce you to today's guest, but first, a quick note that you can find the podcast on Instagram at LoveWhatYouLovePod, on Twitter at WhatYouLovePod, and the website is lovewhatyoulovepod.com. Also, an important note here, I interviewed my next guest in early March 2020, before the pandemic and social distancing got super real. So if you're listening during the pandemic, some of the advice won't be applicable right now, but it will be again. I had a great chat with Michael Chamberlain, a plein air painter and a YouTuber in the Bay Area. What is plein air painting? It's simply the act of painting outdoors. Plein air painting was popularized by the Impressionists and the Hudson River School painters in the late 19th century, as the artists sought to truly capture natural light. Michael is a plein air painter, and it was awesome to talk with him about art, getting outdoors, his favorite landscapes, how having a kid helped him discover painting as an adult, and a surprising, at least to me, fact about that very same kid, and a lot more. So let's find out why Michael loves plein air painting, and why you might learn to love it too. All right, Michael, thank you so much for joining me.
It's my pleasure.
Awesome. So you are a plein air painter and have a YouTube channel and quite a following there. So can you explain to people what plein air painting is?
Basically plein air is just a French term for, I believe the translation is open air. So it means painting on location. So you're painting, so I paint a lot of landscapes. So that would be painting landscapes on location as opposed to painting them in a studio from a photo. So yeah, it's basically, just outdoor painting.
And so were you trained in studio painting? How did you come to wanting to paint outside like that?
So basically, I started painting in 2003. How old was I? I think I was 38 years old. And I had no previous art experience other than just, the natural interest in drawing that kids have. But I was mostly interested in other things like music and building things out of wood. But anyway, at the age of 38, I decided I wanted to paint. And so I just went to Michael's and I got some basic supplies, but realized I needed some more information. And at that time, the best place for that was the library. So I just went and got library books, and I just kept seeing this recurring theme throughout most of the instructional books that I picked up, which was that you really should paint from life as much as possible. And at that point, like in my beginning, the first, say month, I just painted from photographs because I didn't know any better. And basically that's how it started. So I just took the advice that I read in these books and I got an easel, and some paint, and basically I had to get a special easel for outdoors, but that's what I did. And then I went over to Half Moon Bay and gave it a go. Yeah.
Amazing. Wow. So you said you just wanted to start painting, but what was behind that? Like, why did you feel like you had to start painting?
It's interesting. My daughter, 2003, my daughter would have been 2. I think I've always been sort of a creative person, and originally that, the creative outlet for me was music. I played in bands for many years. So writing songs, playing different instruments. But then I remember when my daughter was born and she was very small, there was a period of time there where I didn't do anything creatively. Like I didn't play music, and it seemed like I had a window of time in the evening where I could do something creative, but playing music was sort of disruptive. But also, I've tried to trace it back and figure out what the spark was, because I don't even fully know I wanted artwork for the house, and I also wanted a creative outlet that didn't make noise. And then there was just this other urge that I don't even Yeah, don't even fully, it's kind of a mystery, but it was just one of those things that gripped me. But that's not uncommon, I think, with creative people. Like I get fired up about a lot of things. Like there was a
Mm.
period of time right before that when I was building like these sort of model train sets where I do these whole landscapes and everything. So it's kind of a pattern, and in my life to get into creative things, and this was just one that stuck for a long time.
Yeah, yeah. So do you see any connections between like the kind of music you played and the kind of art that you produce?
Well, I wouldn't say necessarily like as far as like the style of music or the style of painting, but I would just say in general there are a lot of parallels between music and painting. And the biggest one for me was I think like most musicians who play like say in rock bands or whatever, they are self-educated. So in other words, like I learned from just listening to records and tapes and just figuring it out, like sort of from ear training. So I didn't know how to read. I can read a bit now, but when I first started out, it was purely by, you know, self-education. And most of the friends that I had and most of the people I played in bands with were the same thing. You just kind of figure it out by listening. So the parallel, I think, or the helpful thing about that was when I went to start painting, that process of self-education I found was invaluable. Just to have the confidence to know, like, even at 38 with no experience, I can figure this out. I did it with music. I'll just apply the same sort of, approach to painting. And that's what I did. So I think that was a really helpful. That was a really helpful thing, having that musical background. But there's other things that other things about music too. It's just there's so many parallels, but that's the big one that I noticed right off.
Interesting. And so, do you have any particular influences on your painting style? So, obviously the Impressionists, they were kind of the ones who first really got into plein air painting. Do you have any particular Impressionists that you are influenced by, or any more modern artists that influence you?
I think when I first started out, I was definitely interested in like the early California painters and, of course, the Impressionists. And what's interesting is that although I liked their work, I think that I was mostly inspired by the lifestyle in a way, or whatever romantic sort of fantasy I had
Right.
about what the lifestyle was. And I think that was a big influence. I'd say as far as an artist that created maybe sort of a world that I enjoyed visiting, like say via a monograph or like a book that has their paintings, would be Edward Hopper's watercolors.
Oh.
And not so much his, like, I was surprised, like I like his oil paintings, but somebody gave me a book of his watercolors, and it's just, those were all plein air. I don't think he painted oil paintings plein air very often, but he did a lot of watercolor. And I just remember looking through that book and just sort of liking the feel of the world, the world that he created through his art. And so looking through that book felt like visiting, it was the real world, but as seen through, Edward Hopper. So I would say Edward Hopper was a big influence, and then say, yeah, the Impressionists and the California Impressionists as well, but not with any specific artist. And then as I got further along in the process, especially when I started showing in galleries and selling my work, it became very important to me to be careful not to imitate anybody, and just go out and react to the environment and try to come up with my own thing, so to speak.
Yeah, yeah. How would you describe I mean, I'm not asking you to put yourself into a specific genre, but like, how would you describe your painting style and kind of the works that you produce?
That's a good question. I mean, I wouldn't say that. I'd say that I think I'm attracted to light and shadow. Definitely attracted to light. So, like my paintings, I always want them to have a feeling of light in them. And
Why is that?
it's interesting because I think that light itself, like sunlight itself, creates an emotional response. I've thought about it. Like if you imagine yourself, like say you're laying in bed and a cloud passes over. There is a change that you feel, I think, emotionally when that happens. And I don't know, for some reason, the paintings that I do that have a feel where I get that feeling where the light feels real. Those are my favorite paintings. So that's something that I also appreciate in somebody like Hopper, who was very, very driven by light. But I find that I'm drawn to that in other painters as well. But as far as the style goes, it's mostly I try to do, to have sort of loose brushwork, but have a strong structure underneath. So I like the drawing to be fairly accurate but then have this loose brushwork, as loose as possible, so that you can see the brush strokes and that there's a variety of textures in the paint. So I guess that would be some sort of modern impressionistic realism, I suppose.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
But yeah, so I know that's probably not a good label, but I would say that's probably that's probably a fair description.
Yeah. One of the things that's always so interesting to me, so I got a minor in art history back ages ago in college. And so I love going to art museums, art galleries. And one of the things that always fascinates me is, getting close to a painting and seeing the brushwork. When you see something, in a book or whatever online, you can't really get a good sense of the brushwork. And that brushwork really, to me, it expresses so much emotion.
Yes, that's a good point. Well, it also, too, this is something, it's really interesting because oftentimes when I'm painting on location, like somebody they may be up on a bluff or a cliff or something, kind of looking down, and they're like, oh, wow, that looks great. Can I come down and take a closer look? And then when they come down and they look at it, they're like, oh, man, what's going on? Like, wow, I thought this thing was super detailed and and they're always surprised at how loose and the strokes are kind of heavy. And so, yeah, I think that is something that is really important to do, is to go out and see art in real life, because through, Instagram or even books, you don't get the real experience of seeing it up close. And as far as what you mentioned about the emotion in there, I think there's something very special about good brushwork. If you live with a painting, there's the scene and there may be the light, but then as you stare into it, your eye can wander around, and that's when the brushwork becomes really interesting. And or it gives the painting a certain depth that it wouldn't have if you didn't have, if you had, say, just more like a photographic painting style. Not that there's anything wrong with that style, but I just think that for me, it's just like another level of complexity and that creates just another level of interest. Also, it allows the viewer to participate in a way too, because if something is suggested, then it engages, and I think that's what happened. It engages the viewer. So you're participating. A lot of times, if something's suggested, you're creating the image as well through your perception, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
In other words, the person who sees the painting from a slight distance away is saying, they're like, oh my God, it's so detailed. I'm like, no, I just suggested stuff and you filled in the details. And that allows it to be a more personal experience, I think.
Absolutely. So is that why you created your channel? Because for folks who haven't seen your channel, you take people out on location and show them your process. What was the thought process behind creating this channel? Yeah.
So I started with YouTube. I started the YouTube channel, I guess it's almost 3 years ago. And actually it started like 7 years ago. But I didn't know what to do with it. So at first I was just like, I'd hold up today's painting, and I'd kind of talk about it for a few minutes. But I just felt like, I'm not sure if you're aware, but my daughter is she's a YouTuber, and she's like, she has 8.6 million subscribers.
What?
Yeah.
Okay.
She was on the cover of Cosmo last month.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So we both kind of got reinvigorated about it. Her channel did better than mine, but hey, I'm still happy. I wouldn't want what she's got. It's
Right.
a handful. But the point is, we both sort of started, and I didn't have TV. I haven't had TV in the house for like 15 years. So YouTube was kind of what I watched for visual entertainment and information, and she was the same. And so when about 3 years ago we decided, she was like, I want to start a channel. And I'm like, yeah, I want to redo my channel. And so we started showing each other different YouTubers. And I just came across Casey Neistat, who's a vlogger. And I just thought, maybe I'll do like painting vlogs, where I go out and I just film being out there. And then after I did a few of those, I found that I really, again, the creative part of that was really satisfying. I felt like I already had this experience in composing visually. So most of my, a lot of my scenery shots are all composed the way I compose a painting. And then also the feedback I got from people was really positive, especially people who, like young people who don't have access to art programs, or people who are in different countries that don't have maybe art schools or whatever. I remember early on, I got somebody messaged me on Instagram, because I also have an Instagram account, but he's somebody who watched my videos, and he's in India, and he DM'd me and he sent me some images of his recent work. And he was like, I feel like I've grown so much from watching your channel. And he's like, I started watching your channel 2 months ago, look back through my feed and look at my progress since I've started watching. And I actually, when I looked at it, I was like kind of scared, because I was like, this guy's like, he's getting really good. Now, of course, a lot of that is him and his natural thing. But I thought, man, if he's getting anything out of what I'm doing, that's really awesome. So that's something that really further motivates me. So yeah, and then now it's part of my income as well, which kind of it's nice to diversify when you're creative, so you're not, putting everything in one place or expecting your income from one place. So
Right, absolutely. You must have created a pretty nice community for yourself.
Yeah, well, that's the interesting thing about that is, yes, and I think so. And so I've got some really good friends who were people who watched my channel, and then it became, if I was traveling around, they would say, or if they were traveling to California, they would email me and say, hey, it would be great if we could get together and paint. And, so they become good friends, and some of them have been repeatedly in the videos as well. But I do think this is something that's interesting, like with the modern plein air movement. It's most of the gatherings are based around competition.
Oh.
Yeah. So most of the plein air events where people get together, big organized events, there's a competition, and then a judge comes in and whatever. And so when I was first starting in my channel, and I didn't have a YouTube channel, I didn't really have access to other painters. Like, there was no one on the peninsula here that I knew that was plein air painting. And I wanted to paint with other people and kind of like figure out what they're doing and learn from, it's always good to see what other people are doing, what their process is, and kind of helps, it's like everybody gets motivated from each other. So what happened was, I went to a few of these plein air competitions expecting camaraderie,
Oh.
but it's just like, unfortunately, and there has been camaraderie in, like, I did 3, and one of those, I think there was definitely camaraderie. But then, the judge, I just didn't like the whole the competitive element. So what I'm trying to do with my YouTube channel community, if you could call it that, is create an environment where we're focusing on, it's not a competition. It's more just sort of trying to inspire each other to push ourselves to make discoveries. And that's why on my channel, I'm not afraid to show the paintings that I feel aren't that great or don't work out, because that's a real part of the process. And I think that art is one of these things that can be, where oftentimes through, galleries or whatever, there's this myth that's perpetuated of the artistic genius. And it's just BS, basically. Like, it's just a numbers game. Like, the people who knows, it really is. I mean, it's about showing up and producing a lot of work. And if you paint a lot, you're going to paint a lot of good paintings. You're going to paint a lot of bad paintings too.
Right, right.
That's kind of been my approach, is just to not, to be real about it and share the reality. And I am a professional working artist. I've had multiple solo shows, and that's what I do for a living. So at first it was I was a little nervous about exposing too much truth, because I felt like, okay, if I am real about this and I'm blowing up the myth of the genius artist or whatever, is that going to compromise my sales, or is it going to, and then I was just like, whatever.
People respond to authenticity.
Absolutely. And I think more now, now than ever.
So one of the things that I love about your channel, besides, seeing the process and seeing the finished works, is just selfishly because I live in the Bay Area and I love seeing, you go out on location over at the coast. Do you think that if you lived anywhere else in the country, in the world, that you would produce, obviously the landscape is different, but would you produce similar kind of work?
Well, I think it would be, I think my approach to painting would be the same. Obviously, the scenery would be different. And for example, I went down, actually, California is a place where there is such a variety of landscape, which is what's great for a painter, because you can constantly go and challenge yourself with a different sort of landscape than, like I was just down in Joshua Tree, made some videos down there. And, painted down there for several days. And that was really challenging because it's just different from anything I've done before. And those trees are so unusual. And so, yeah, I think that but if I was like somewhere else in the country, I think I would use the same approach as far as like paint application. And, I would still have my sense of composition. Yeah, it would, I think I can pretty much find something to paint anywhere, But I do love California.
You mentioned that you were influenced by Hopper's watercolors. Why have you decided to go down the road of using oils, plein air?
Well, the thing about oils that appealed to me originally was I don't know. I just felt like it was like this classic medium, that. And then the paintings that I did see, I loved the sort of fluidity of the paint, like say brushwork of in the case of the Impressionists. But I think that it was that was basically it. I just now my mom did take oil painting classes when I was a little kid, like when I was 5. I do remember the smells of paint around the house. My grandfather also was a painter, but he was like purely like a hobby painter. He would do paintings of like vacations that he was on, like vacation spots or whatever. So in some ways there was a certain familiarity there, even though none of the equipment was left. There were a few, I think I may have had my mom's box of paints that had long dried up. So maybe that's part of it, but I just feel like kind of classic element, or the classic nature of it was something that drew me to it originally. And now the thing I really love about it is the fact that it's not super fat, like it's slow drying. It's you can kind of work with it. If I want to accelerate the drying time, I can add mediums that, which is, like a fluid you mix with the paint that speeds up the drying time. So that's something that I really appreciate about it now. Plus it's just so like squeezing out oil paint is such beautiful stuff, really.
Yeah.
It's like creamy and colorful. It's just, very inspiring to work with.
So what was the first painting that you completed that you're like, oh yeah, this is good? Like, what was it of? How did you feel?
Well, the interesting thing about that is that the paintings where I'm like, wow, that's a good painting, I don't really realize it at the time. It's more like now I'm looking back. In fact, I was talking to a buddy of mine who I paint with, and I was looking, he was talking about some paintings I did that he liked, and I was looking back through my Instagram and I was like, wow, that actually is that's really like, but at the time that I painted it, I didn't think that, I was kind of more focused on maybe the things that didn't work or that challenged me. So I don't know that there was ever some moment where, I kind of thought, wow, that's really good. I think that what I felt was that with every painting that I did, there was enough good stuff happening to keep me motivated to try to do better the next time.
Mm.
And so it's just been in the past few years, I think, where I've looked back at some of the stuff that I've done, even like, 7 or 8 years ago, that I feel like, wow, that's a good painting. Like I might want to look at that and see what the heck did I do? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So yeah, it's more of a hindsight thing. But I think from the very first painting, I thought, wow, I think I could do this. I'm not happy with this, but I think I could do this. And I want to try another one and try to solve whatever problems I feel are in this painting in the next one. And then that's just the process. Like it keeps going and going. And again, it's mostly in hindsight that I think a painting is good. Usually right after it's completed, I'm not sure about it for a while.
Right. You want to put it away and not look at it for a while.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what surprises you about either painting or having a YouTube channel or the artistic process? What is most surprising to you?
Well, I think in some ways the surprise that I'm looking for when I paint is that discovery. So in other words, if I paint something and something happens, like if I get it home and I look at it and I think, wow, that's really, like, look what happened there. That's really cool. So oftentimes I think the surprise element is maybe like if you apply yourself, you'd be surprised at what you can do, if you really stick with something. I think that's part of it. I think I would not have predicted when I started this that it would have taken me on the journey that it has. So that's sort of a surprise. I think a lot of the surprises were in the beginning, like, wow, this is a lot harder than I thought it was going to be. It was more difficult than I thought. Definitely.
Why is that? What expectations did you have?
I think I don't know. Like I was always kind of kind of a do-it-yourself person, had a lot of experience like woodworking and doing other creative things. It just was, I would see a painting that I liked and it would look like, oh, that should be so easy. Like you could look at an impressionist painting and think, oh, that looks kind of like a mess. I could do that. And then you go to do it and you're like, whoa, this is a lot more complicated than I thought. Like, why does my painting not look, it looks terrible, or it doesn't look. So I think that it was a lot harder than I thought. That's also something that keeps me fired up, though. I make videos about surfing too. I've been surfing for about, it's almost 8 months or whatever. That had that effect on me too. Like when I went out, I thought, oh, this, I've skateboarded since I was a kid. That challenge, it was harder than I thought. And that challenge made me want to go out every day until I figured it out. And that's sort of how painting was too in the beginning. It's just, so I was surprised at how difficult it was. But again, there were enough good results that it kept me, or maybe I was even delusional. I think I've heard somebody say that I think you've got to be delusional to be a painter in a way where you think your work is better than it really is. And you're like, and I think I probably had some of that where I was like, hey, that's pretty good, and I should keep going at this. But especially when I look at my first plein air paintings, they're not so good at all. They're terrible.
So it seems like you're super motivated by challenge. So you've had a series of creative obsessions, maybe. So do you see anything that's kind of on the horizon that's beyond painting and YouTube?
No, I mean, I don't, in that I feel like, I think from my younger years, I suffered from kind of going from one thing to the other. I feel like at this point, I want to stay focused on, I still do play music as well. And I still write songs and stuff, but I don't, that's more social and I don't have any real goals there. And my only goal with painting really is to just keep going and keep discovering and keep exploring different places to paint and painting with different people and making videos about that. So yeah, most of my motivation at this point is just to keep going with what I'm doing and see what happens. But I am committed to this and committed to staying focused on being a painter and a YouTuber too. Like I really love making videos. So the two of those things keeps me pretty busy.
So if you had one wish about painting or YouTubing or both, what would it be?
I would say the thing that I'm Yeah, I'd say the thing that I'd like to do is get to a point where maybe like financially, that I was able to actually save some money. But I mean, it's like that's the thing I think that's been the hardest, and I'm still going, but the hardest thing about it for me is the ups and downs of the income. But I would say over the last few years, that's been a lot better. So if there's an artist listening, realize that those first years where you make the plunge into going full time, it's difficult and it's scary because most of us are used to a regular income. And you could put together a show. It could take you several months to put together a show, and then it might not sell at all, or you might sell, and it may be factors that have nothing to do with you. It could be the gallery you're working with, or it could be the economy, or who knows. So I would say that would be one wish that I would have, that as time goes on, and it's kind of happening already, is that, the financial thing becomes more steady, and either that or that I just get better at dealing with the dips.
Right, right. If a listener is new to painting, like maybe oil painting and or plein air painting, and they want to get started in it, how would you suggest they get started?
I would say, to be honest, I would say YouTube is probably the best place. There's so much information on YouTube, whether it's my videos or somebody else's. I would say YouTube is a great place because it can actually demonstrate, and you can see the process, or you can see the equipment. I would have loved to have something like that when I first started out. So I think you can learn a lot from YouTube. It can give you like a base of knowledge to get started. And then if you want to take individual workshops or classes, you can do that. But it seems like most of the workshops require you having some basic understanding. And I think that can be gotten through books and through things like YouTube. And if you know somebody who paints, that's even better. Somebody who can just help you figure out what to start off with.
I think there's this fallacy among new artists that if I have the best paints and the best brushes, it's going to make me a great artist right out of the gate.
Yeah, so that's a very good point. In fact, what I found is that, because now that I've been painting a while, I know quite a few painters who are professional painters who make a living doing it, or, part of a substantial part of their living. And what I found is they're typically not using the super expensive paints. It's just not, it isn't necessary. So yeah, I think there are some really good student grade paints, really high quality, that professionals use regularly. One would be like Winsor & Newton has a line of paints called Winton, and those are really affordable. Those are really good. And then you could start with a limited palette, with like 3 colors or whatever, and so that you learn how to mix your secondary colors, and so you don't need a lot to get started, and you certainly don't need expensive equipment. I'd say the most challenging part is the easel. And so that's probably the most, and probably the French box easel, which is kind of a wooden, very classic looking easel that folds up. And that's probably the most popular easel for beginners. And you can get those from $100 to $200. That'd probably be your biggest expense. And again, you can see reviews of these on YouTube, and people, talking about different easels on YouTube. But yeah, I don't think you don't need the best stuff to get started. And you can spend a lot. I mean, I'm horrified. Like, there's certain paints that I see where I think, like a tube of white will be like $120.
What?
That's ridiculous. What are you talking? Or certain other rare colors. You know how it is in anything, there are sort of gearheads or people who are way into the gear.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times they don't tend to be the people, like, it seems like the people that are painting a lot and painting professionally are really looking to keep the price down, because they go through a lot of materials, and then you've got to sell your work. So it's all about, finding that best value. And there are some tremendous values out there. Even the student grade paints, I heard somebody say, like a curator or something in a museum was talking about how the quality of student grade paints often is better than the stuff that people were using, 100 or 200 years ago, like say even the Impressionists. Like the quality of the paint, I think for some of the, less expensive paints is actually really good. So looking at like brands like Winton, or even Winsor and Newton's their student grade paints are really good, and Winsor and Newton's an English company that's been producing paints for years. So that would be a good place to look for quality paints at a good price.
Got it. So I know you say you enjoy the variety of landscapes in California, and it's an interesting challenge to find new places. But what is your very favorite place to paint?
I would say I have. I go back to Maine in the summertime occasionally. Like I didn't go last year, but I went like 10 consecutive years before. I really do like painting. If I'm going to paint something totally different from California, Maine is the place. Coastal Maine for me, love it. I think probably one of the most pleasant painting experiences I've had in the last year. There were two. One was painting in Laguna Beach in Heisler Park on this nice grass lawn. It was like a perfect day, and it was just so beautiful, and it just doesn't get any better than that. And I was painting with a buddy, and I didn't even care if the painting came out. It was just really, really nice. The other place within the last year that was really awesome to paint was I went with my daughter. She was participating in the Paris Fashion Week thing in October. And so I was her plus one to accompany her on that trip. But I didn't see her the whole time because she was so busy. But that meant I had like 4 days in Paris. And so I painted on the Seine. I didn't know, I hadn't been there really before. So I kind of looked around. I found a spot on the Seine. And in my video, I'm pointing out saying, oh, I think I'm going to paint that building. I like the way the bridge goes over to that building. And then people in the comments are like, oh, you mean the Louvre? And I'm like, it's like, sorry, so. Sorry. The Louvre is huge, like I didn't know. So anyway, now I know it's the Louvre. But just painting down there, it was really, really nice. And the same thing, just being in that environment where, Pizarro had painted there. Like there was so many people had painted that view. In fact, Hopper had painted the same view, purely coincidentally. I just came out of this art store, got some supplies at Saint-Allier, which is an art store, famous old art store on the left bank, I believe. And I came out and I'm like making a video and I'm like, let's see, what can I paint? And I'm like, oh, that building over there. And then later people are like, oh, there's tons of paintings of that very view. But that was really wonderful. But again, there's plenty of times here in California, provided it's not too windy or too cold, where it's just wonderful.
Yeah. Well, and it sounds like it's just kind of a wonderful side benefit of plein air painting is, getting you outside and helping you appreciate the environment around you.
Yes, I agree. Absolutely. I think it is. I think that you really have a different level of appreciation for things when you have to reproduce it. You look like more carefully. Like I know in myself, it's like funny. I've been, when I'm painting with friends out by the ocean, I remember looking out and at some point the colors become maybe more, I don't know if they become more vivid or you perceive them more vividly, but I remember like mixing these colors of the ocean, which appeared to be this like sort of deep blue-green grayish color. And then I kept mixing, some red into, like I mixed the blue-green, but I said, God, there's more red. It needs more red. And I kept putting red. And then I'm looking out there and it's just like, wow, there's so much red in that water, and there's things like that, or that I would never notice. And it's very beautiful. Or like the way the surface of water is reflective. And so you eventually figure out that you've got the base color of the water, but then the surface is like kind of all these broken facets of like reflection. And what it's reflecting typically is going to be the sky. So there's all these subtle colors that are just really, really beautiful. So again, painting on location in the environment, you can really get lost in looking at all the minute beauty that's out there.
I love that. I love it. Well, thank you so much, Michael, for taking the time to chat with me today. I learned a lot, and this was a fun conversation.
Yeah, it's a real pleasure.
That was so awesome. I hope you had fun too, and I hope you learned a few things. As a reminder, you can find the podcast on Instagram at LoveWhatYouLovePod and on Twitter at WhatYouLovePod. Come and tell me what your favorite landscape is or who your favorite plein air painter is. Don't forget to use the hashtag #LoveWhatYouLove so we can continue the conversation. Don't forget to check out Michael's channel, which I'll link to in the show notes. If you enjoyed today's episode, consider subscribing and leaving a review on iTunes. It really helps. Especially these days, it is so important to just love the hell out of whatever you love, and then share that love with other people, because we need just so much more joy and love in this world right now. Thanks for listening. Let's hang out again soon.